They say memory fades with time, but some memories refuse to go quietly. They hum beneath the noise of everyday life. A name, a face, a question you can't let go of. For me, that name has always been Ebby Steppach, 18 years old. A smile that could melt the stiffness out of a room. The kind of girl who left fingerprints on people's hearts without meaning to. She was radiant the way youth often is, full of contradictions, fierce and fragile, reckless and kind, searching for something she couldn't quite name. When I first learned her story, it wasn't from the headlines. It was from a mother's voice that broke halfway through her sentence. "My daughter's been missing," she said, and I know she didn't just leave. The year was 2015. Little Rock, Arkansas. Autumn was settling in, the kind that drapes neighborhoods in gold, just before everything turns cold and quiet. Ebby had just turned 18 6 months earlier. She was learning how to navigate that strange border between teenager and adult. Like many, she made mistakes, impulsive choices, loud nights, stubborn silences. But underneath it all, she was still someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's friend. Those who knew her remember how passionate she was about people, how she'd stop her car to help a stray animal or sit with someone who was hurting. There was a restlessness in her, a sense that she wanted to matter, to be heard. But in the weeks before she vanished, something changed. Friends would later say she'd grown distant, distracted. There were whispers, fragments of a story too heavy for a girl her age. Ebby reportedly told friends she had been sexually assaulted at a party, and she wasn't going to stay silent about it. She said she had video evidence on her phone. She said she was going to the police. Those words, "I'm going to police," would echo long after she was gone. The night before she disappeared, she called her brother, Trevor. It wasn't a calm conversation. Her voice trembled. She sounded scared, paranoid even. "They're after me," she said, though no one really knew who they were. The call cut in and out. Then silence. It's the kind of silence you remember forever, the kind that presses on the chest like a weight you can't lift. By the next day, October 25th, 2015, her phone stopped responding. Calls went straight to voicemail. Messages were never read. Her car, a silver 2003 Volkswagen Passat, would be found later that evening, abandoned in Chalamont Park, a quiet stretch of green tucked into West Little Rock. Inside the car were her purse, her phone, her keys, everything but her. The park was eerily still that night. The wind stirred the trees, scattering leaves across the hood of her car. A couple walking their dog noticed a vehicle sitting oddly, angled near a drainage ditch. But there was no sign of struggle, no footprints leading away, no clear clue about what happened to her. Police searched the park. Flashlights cut through the dark, beams bouncing off the slick surfaces of the drainage pipes that ran beneath the trails. But after hours of combing the area, they found nothing, not a single trace of Ebby. The official word was that she was missing, perhaps voluntarily, perhaps not. Her family never believed she ran away. That night, her mother, Lori, sat awake, staring at her phone. Every minute felt like a lifetime. Every buzz, every vibration, she prayed would be Ebby, but the call never came. When you lose someone suddenly, your mind loops through every small moment you shared, the laughter, the arguments, the last text you sent. Lori replayed those final days over and over. The last time she saw her daughter standing in the doorway, the half smile, the way she said, "I'll be fine," and then she was gone. By morning, flyers began circulating. Missing, Ebby Steppach. Last seen October 25th, 2015. Her photo, bright eyes, wide smile, stare back from every lamppost in Little Rock. Social media lit up. Friends, classmates, even strangers joined the search. It was as if the entire city inhaled and held its breath. But behind the urgency was something darker, an unease that whispered this wasn't just another runaway case. Something had gone wrong. Something terrible. For days, the family called police for updates, but leads were thin. Chalamont Park was searched again, but only briefly. Investigators canvassed her friends, check her phone records, and try to locate the people from that party she mentioned. Yet somehow, The trail stayed cold. Almost too cold. Weeks turned into months. The silver car remained in evidence storage, its secret seal behind rusted metal. Her phone, the one that might have held proof of the alleged assault, was never fully recovered. Every answer seemed to lead to another question. Some nights, Lori drove to Chalamont Park herself. She'd sit near the spot where Ebby's car had been found, staring into the shadows. "I can feel her here," she told reporters later. "I just don't know where." People talk about closure like it's a door you can close and walk away from. But in cases like this, there is no door, only a hallway of echoes. What happened to Ebby that night? Did she run from someone? Did she meet with someone she trusted? Did fear drive her into the dark? Or did someone else guide her there? No one knew. And for nearly 3 years, that silence, that dreadful, unending silence, was all that remained. Still, the search never stopped. Lori refused to let her daughter become another cold statistic, another face fading from missing persons databases. She knocked on doors, pleaded for new searches, spoke to reporters, demanded accountability. Every time the case slipped from headlines, she pulled it back with sheer willpower. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise and grief and stubborn hope, the truth waited, buried in a place everyone had already looked. But no one had looked deep enough. The thing about hope is that it doesn't die all at once. It erodes, slowly, painfully, like a stone worn down by years of rain. For nearly 3 years after Ebby vanished, her family lived in that slow erosion. Every sunrise brought a flicker of hope. Every sunset took a piece of it away. When I look back at that time, it's hard to describe the atmosphere that settled over Little Rock. The story of an 18-year-old girl, beautiful, bright, fearless, disappearing without a trace haunted everyone who heard it. Her face lingered on bulletin boards at grocery stores, in the waiting rooms of churches, on streetlight poles that bent in the wind. People whispered about her. The mystery, the rumors, the strange details that never quite made sense. Some said she'd run off to start over. Others insisted something sinister had happened. And then there were those who thought she was still out there, trapped somewhere between the living and the lost. But for her mother, Lori, there was no maybe. There was only a truth she could feel in her bones. Ebby hadn't left. She was still close, waiting to be found. That belief kept her going through nights that stretched into years. Every tip, every psychic claim, every strange phone call that began with, "I think I saw her," Lori followed them all. She searched abandoned buildings, walked through parks, sat with private investigators in diner booths lit by flickering neon. Each lead ended in disappointment, but she refused to stop. "I promised her," she once said. "I told her no matter what happens, I'll never stop looking." Meanwhile, the investigation itself faltered. Detectives rotated off the case. Files were misplaced, phone logs forgotten. The initial search of Chalamont Park, the very place where a car had been found, had turned up nothing, and so, in time, it was crossed off the map. The general assumption was that she'd left the area, perhaps driven elsewhere that night. But not Lori. She returned to that park again and again. There's a photograph, one the family shared years later, showing her standing at the park's edge, staring into the tree line. Her hair is blowing across her face, eyes hollowed by sleeplessness. She's holding a small candle in one hand. Behind her, the park looks almost serene. Green, quiet, indifferent. You'd never guess that beneath its surface lay the answer everyone had missed. If you walk through Chalamont Park, you'll see a maze of walking trails and drainage ditches that snake beneath the ground. They're narrow, dark tunnels, slick with runoff, the kind of place most people never look twice at. But for some reason, those tunnels called to Lori. She'd tell friends that every time she stood near one, she felt a pull, as if her daughter was trying to tell her something. By 2018, nearly 3 years had passed. Lori was tired, angry, but not broken. She'd spent countless hours pushing for renewed searches, filing complaints, meeting with officials, pleading with the media to keep the story alive. And then, one day in May, something shifted. The Little Rock Police Department had recently reassigned detectives to the case. They decided to revisit Chalamont Park one more time. It was an unseasonably humid morning. the air thick and heavy, when officers arrived with flashlights and equipment. Among them was Detective Tommy Hudson, who'd worked the case before. He admitted later that the park still haunted him. Every time I came here, he said, it felt unfinished. They started near where the car had been found, the same stretch of pavement Lori had stood over hundreds of times. Only this time, they looked differently. They focused on a drainage pipe, a wide, dark cylinder half buried beneath overgrowth, partially collapsed by years of erosion. It was easy to miss unless you knew where to look. Hudson crouched down and shone his flashlight into the opening. The beam disappeared into darkness, catching on debris, branches, mud, and something pale that looked at first like stone. But it wasn't stone. The smell hit next, faint, sour, unmistakable. The smell of something that should have been found long ago. They called it in. The park was sealed off. Investigators combed the site for hours, careful, methodical. When they finally pulled the remains from the pipe, there was no doubt whose they were. The confirmation would come later from the Arkansas State Crime Lab, but in that moment, every officer on scene knew. Ebby had been there all along. For Lori, the news came as both a relief and a fresh wound. When the phone rang that day, she felt her breath leave her body. After years of not knowing, she finally had an answer, but it wasn't the one she prayed for. I told them, she whispered later. I told them she was there. 3 years of searching, 3 years of unanswered questions, and all along her daughter had been lying just yards away from where a car had been abandoned. The park was no longer just a park after that. It became sacred ground, a place of mourning, of reckoning. Reporters swarmed the area. Helicopters hovered above. News anchors said her name again for the first time in years. The remains of missing teenager Ebby Steppach have been found. But even as headlines broke, one question echoed louder than ever. How had this happened? How could a drainage pipe, only a short distance from a major search area, conceal the truth for so long? Theories spread fast. Some said the first searches hadn't gone deep enough. Others believed she'd been moved there later. Still others whispered about the people from the party she'd spoken of, the one she allegedly accused. But officially, police said only that the case was being treated as a homicide investigation. No arrests, no suspects, no clear cause of death. The world moved on, but Lori didn't. She couldn't. She sat at her kitchen table that night, candle flickering beside her, holding Ebby's old sweatshirt in her hands. She was so close, she said. So close that whole time. Sometime when I drive past that park, I think about those 3 years, about all the people who walked past that drain, never knowing what lay beneath their feet. The thought chills me. Ebby wasn't a statistic or a headline. She was a girl who laughed too loud, who loved too much, who wanted justice for herself and maybe for others too. Her story isn't just about how she died. It's about how fiercely she tried to live. But now the mystery deepened. The park had finally given up her body, yet refused to give up her truth. The people who knew her, who loved her, wanted answers. The city owed her that much. And somewhere in that silence that had haunted everyone for years, another question began to form. One that still lingers today. If the truth was buried with Ebby once, could it be buried again? The first time I stood at Chalamon Park, I remember how ordinary it looked. A small stretch of green nestled in West Little Rock, framed by quiet homes and the steady hum of traffic. But if you stayed long enough, you could feel something underneath it, like the ground itself was keeping a secret. The air was heavier there. The trees seemed to bend inward, as if they were listening to something the rest of the U.S. couldn't hear. This was where they found her car, a white 2003 Honda Accord, parked awkwardly between 2 curbs, engine off, doors unlocked. Her phone, her purse, her makeup bag, her car keys, all inside. The gas tank was full. The driver's seat was pushed too far back for her height. It looked like whoever left it wanted it found, but not the person who'd been driving it. It was October 25th, 2015, just one day after she had last spoken to her brother. Police had been called to the park by residents who noticed the car sitting there overnight. They didn't know at the time that the name Ebby Steppach would soon echo through every news channel in Arkansas. I remember reading how officers initially treated the car as abandoned, not a crime scene. They looked inside, saw no blood, no signs of a struggle. The area was known for teenage meetups, occasional vandalism, nothing violent. They ran the plates, marked the car for towing, and left. Days later, when Ebby was officially reported missing, that same Honda became the center of a storm. Lori, her mother, was beside herself. She drove to Chalamont Park over and over, pleading for more to be done. "My daughter's in there somewhere," she reportedly told police. "You're not looking hard enough." But the drains, those dark, winding storm pipes running beneath the park, remained unchecked for years. What's hard to grasp, even now, is how close they were. For 3 years, volunteers, detectives, and families searched every stretch of Little Rock, abandoned houses, wooded trails, ravines. Hundreds of tips came in. Psychics called. So did strangers claiming visions, citing suspicions. Every lead, it seemed, turned to mist, and yet, beneath the park where her car was found, her remains had been there all along, in the storm drain system just a few feet underground. Before that discovery, though, came the silence. The kind of silence that drives mothers to knock on station doors, to make calls at midnight, to post flyers in the rain. Lori did it all. She launched social media campaigns, organized searches, and begged the public for help. Her voice grew hoarse from explaining her daughter's story to anyone who'd listen. And that story kept circling back to the night of October 24th. Ebby had reportedly told 2 friends that she believed she'd been sexually assaulted at a party. An assault, she said, had been recorded. She sounded panicked, angry, determined to confront those involved. Then she called her brother, Trevor. He later said she sounded disoriented, like she didn't know where she was. The call dropped. When he tried calling back, she didn't answer. No one ever heard from her again. Police would later confirm that Ebby's phone pinged in the area of Chalamont Park that night. Then nothing. The signal went dead. Forensic teams tried to trace it, but the data led only to that small pocket of land. And beneath it, the sprawling labyrinth of pipes where runoff water from the neighborhood flowed through like veins. In the months that followed, there were reported sightings. A girl resembling Ebby at gas stations, bus stops, near the mall. Each tip sent investigators chasing shadows. Each false lead deepened the ache. I've read through the records. I've listened to her mother's interviews. There's a haunting consistency in Lori's words, a mother who knew, somehow, from the beginning, that her daughter never left that park. She pleaded with police to check the drains. They said it wasn't safe, she recalled. They said there was no evidence she was in there. But in 2018, when a cold case detective took over, the first thing he did was bring in specialized crews to re-examine that area. And then, the drain whispered back. On May 22nd, 2018, 3 years and 7 months after Ebby vanished, investigators sent a camera down one of the pipes. It snagged on something. They pulled back. What they found confirmed Lori's deepest fear. Human remains, later identified through dental records as Ebby Jane Steppach. I can't imagine what it felt like to stand there that day. The sun high, the sound of running water echoing under the concrete, and somewhere in that darkness, the end of a story that should have never ended that way. The discovery raised more questions than answers. How had so many searches missed that spot? Could her remains have washed into the drain later, or had she been there all along? Authorities never publicly confirmed the cause or manner of death. The Pulaski County coroner ruled the case as undetermined. There were no clear signs of trauma visible after so much time. The mystery deepened into something colder, heavier, like the drain had swallowed not just her, but the truth with her. To this day, her family believes someone knows more. Someone who was at that party, someone who saw her that night, someone who stayed quiet. The alleged assault remains a shadowed piece of the story, one without resolution, yet impossible to separate from what came after. Chalamont Park has since changed. New families picnic there. Children play by the basketball courts. Cars come and go, and most people don't know that just beneath their feet, a storm pipe once held the city's greatest sorrow. But if you walk there alone, late in the day when the light starts to fade, it's hard not to feel her presence, the kind of quiet that makes you lower your voice without knowing why. Lori once said, "Ebby was light, pure light, And light always finds its way out. In a way, she did. Because even though the park went silent again, the echoes of that discovery never left. They became a reminder that the truth can be buried, delayed, ignored, but not erased. Grief has a sound. It's not the loud wail you hear in movies. It's quieter, sharper, a sound that cuts through everything else. For Lori Jernigan, that sound again the day Ebby didn't come home, and it never really stopped. There's something both heartbreaking and heroic about the way she moved through those first weeks. When others began to accept that her daughter might have simply run away, Lori refused. She knew Ebby, her stubbornness, her heart, her fierce loyalty. She wasn't the type to vanish without a trace. Every mother says that about her child, but in this case, she was right. I've seen interviews of her from those early months. You can see the exhaustion in her face, but also something else, conviction. She drove through Little Rock every day, handing out flyers, revisiting Chalamon Park, calling the police department, leaving messages when no one answered. "I'm not going away," she told them once. "You're going to hear my daughter's name until you find her." And she meant it. The park became her second home. She'd stand near the spot where the car was found and talk out loud to Ebby, as if her daughter might hear her somehow. She'd tell her she loved her, that she wasn't giving up. Sometimes she'd bring candles. Sometimes she'd bring people, friends, volunteers, strangers who had seen her story online. The community began to notice. Social media gave Lori a voice louder than any press conference. Facebook pages and posts began circulating, each one carrying Ebby's smile, the blonde hair, the dark eyes, the warmth that leapt out from the photo, even through a screen. Strangers began searching wooded areas, trails, and abandoned properties. Volunteers came from as far as neighboring states. But for every ounce of hope, there was an equal weight of frustration. The initial police response had been slow, cautious, procedural. Some officers reportedly believed Ebby had simply run away, possibly to avoid embarrassment or conflict after the party she'd attended. There was no sign of foul play, they said, no evidence of abduction. But Lori knew that didn't add up. The car, the phone, the belongings, everything she cared about was left behind. And then there were the calls. Lori later said she had received strange, taunting messages from people claiming to know what happened. Some were cruel jokes. Others felt too specific to ignore. She turned every one of them over police. She kept logs, screenshots, phone records, every scrap of data, because that was the only thing she could control. The longer the case stayed cold, the louder Lori became. By 2016, she was organizing public awareness events. By 2017, she was working with national missing persons organizations. And through it all, she never stopped pressing law enforcement to search the drains beneath Chalamon Park. She knew the terrain. She'd walked it 100 times. There was a storm drain opening not far from where the Honda had been left. She asked them to send a team in to look, to listen. They said it wasn't feasible, too dangerous, too deep, not enough evidence. But something in her refused to let go of that spot. "I felt her there," she said later. "I don't know how to explain it. I just knew." In late 2017, the case finally changed hands. Detective Tommy Hudson of the Little Rock Police Department took over as the new lead investigator. He approached it like a puzzle that had been left unfinished. He re-interviewed witnesses, revisited evidence, and began combing through every overlooked detail of the original reports. And one of the first things he did was return to Chalamon Park. Hudson said later that when he stood there, looking down at the drain, he couldn't shake the feeling that the answer had been sitting beneath them the whole time. He called in a specialized crew to inspect the drainage system with cameras. It wasn't easy. Years of debris and water buildup made it nearly impossible to navigate. But they persisted. The camera moved through the dark pipe, inch by inch, until it caught on something. That moment, the quiet realization that a 3-year mystery was about to end, would change everything. When Lori got the call in May 2018, she said she felt a strange kind of calm. Not relief, not closure, but something deeper, a stillness that comes when the waiting finally stops. "I knew before they said it," she told reporters later. "I knew it was her. They confirmed through dental records that the remains found in the drain were those of Ebby Steppach, the 18-year-old who had vanished from Little Rock in October 2015. The news rippled through the community. For 3 years, her face had been everywhere, on billboards, online, in the hearts of people who never even met her. Now, they all grieved together. Lori went back to the park that night. The same patch of grass, the same echo of traffic in the distance. Only now there were flowers, candles, photos, notes tucked into the fence. People came quietly, leaving tokens of remembrance. One of them wrote, "You are found, but never forgotten." But even in that moment of collective mourning, there was no resolution. The cause of death was undetermined. No suspects were charged. The alleged assault she had told friends about remained unproven and uninvestigated publicly. The mystery of what really happened to Ebby Steppach still lingered, haunting every detail. Lori, though, didn't see this as an ending. In her mind, finding Ebby's body wasn't closure. It was proof. Proof that she'd been right all along, that her instincts had led her to the truth. Proof that persistence matters even when no one's listening. She once said something that has stayed with me ever since I first heard it. When you lose a child, you lose your sense of time. You stop living by the clock and start living by hope. That's all I had, hope and the sound of my own footsteps. She kept walking, even after the case officially went quiet again. She spoke at schools and awareness events. She worked with other parents of missing children. She turned her grief into something powerful, a movement that urged families never to stop asking questions, never to stop knocking on doors. Because that's what Lori had done. She knocked until the truth finally answered. Faintly, through the dark, from a drain that had been whispering her daughter's name for nearly 3 years. When investigators pulled the first fragments from that drain, time seemed to stop. The sound of scraping metal, the quiet exchange of gloved hands, the hush that fell over the crew. It was as if the entire park held its breath. I've gone over that day in my mind, trying to imagine the weight of it, the smell of damp concrete, the low hum of the generator, the camera feed flickering in and out, and then a shape that shouldn't have been there. It took hours to recover what the water had kept. Forensic teams worked meticulously, piece by piece, documenting every inch of the storm drain. Years of debris had turned the space into a twisted archive of runoff and rot. Twigs, mud, pieces of plastic, bits of glass, all mixed into something that felt almost sacred now. Because somewhere within that darkness, the missing girl from Little Rock had been waiting to be found. The remains were carefully sent to the Arkansas State Crime Lab. The official identification came through dental records. There was no question it was Ebby Steppach. But what came next was harder to face. The coroner's report listed her manner of death as undetermined. After more than 2.5 years exposed to the elements, there was too little left to draw conclusions. No definitive signs of trauma, no clear evidence of homicide, and yet nothing that suggested suicide either. The physical evidence was simply inconclusive. That single word, undetermined, was unbearable. It hung in the air like unfinished business, a hollow verdict for a family that already lived 3 years in limbo. Lori's response was immediate and unwavering. "My daughter didn't put herself in that drain," she said publicly. "Somebody knows what happened. Somebody did this." There was no anger in her tone, just exhaustion wrapped in certainty. You could hear it in her interviews. The years had stripped her of illusions, but not of purpose. She wanted accountability. She wanted names. And above all, she wanted the truth to have a voice as loud as the lies that had once surrounded it. Police reopened the case as a death investigation, not yet a homicide. They re-examined the records, the missing persons reports, and the witness accounts from 2015. Forensic specialists were brought in to interpret the condition of the remains. But answers were slow in coming. Water does cruel things to evidence. It blurs the edges, dissolves the timelines. It hides fingerprints, erases scent trails, carries secrets downstream. The storm drain had been a living thing, constantly shifting, washing, eroding. What it preserved, it also destroyed. Still, even without clear forensics, the circumstantial picture remained unsettling. A young woman reportedly told friends she'd been sexually assaulted at a party, a party where videos may have been recorded. Hours later, she disappeared. Her car was found within a day, abandoned in a park she had no reason to be at. Her body was found years later beneath that same park. To call that a coincidence would stretch reason beyond breaking. Detective Hudson and his team continued their work quietly, retracing the original investigation. Some of the young men from the alleged party were reportedly re-interviewed, though no public charges emerged. The case was complex, complicated by the time lost, the evidence degraded, the witnesses grown distant. But the shadow of that night remained. In moments like these, you realize how many missing people never get this far. How many families are still waiting for a call that never comes? For Lori, finding Ebby's remains didn't end the nightmare. It simply shifted it from where is she to what really happened. In the years that followed, Ebby's story became larger than just her name. It became a symbol for every parent fighting to be heard, every case that slipped through procedural cracks. Her disappearance prompted discussions about how law enforcement handles missing young adults, especially those initially classified as runaways. Lori spoke openly about the frustration of those early days. If they had treated it as a crime from the beginning, she said, maybe we would have had evidence. Maybe we would have had justice. Her words struck a chord. Across Arkansas and even beyond, families began advocating for improved missing persons response policies. Ebby's case was cited in training sessions, in procedural reviews, in online discussions about reform. The drain had kept her body, but the story, her light, it escaped. Sometimes, when I think of her, I don't picture the headlines or the search parties. I picture a teenager sitting in her car, music playing low, headlights cutting through a dark park. A girl who had her whole life waiting beyond that night. College plans, road trips, dreams that stretched past Little Rock. Her friends describe her as someone who noticed everything. The kind of person who could sense when someone else was having a bad day and wouldn't let them go without a hug. She felt things deeply. One friend said, if you were hurting, she carried it with you. Maybe that's why so many strangers still carry her memory, because the empathy she lived with is the empathy her story demands. The park is quieter now. The drain has been sealed. But each year, people still visit the spot, leaving flowers and letters. Some write about how her story changed them. Others write simply, we remember. Lori once said she feels Ebby most when it rains. She'll sit by the window and listen, imagining the water running through the same earth that once hid her daughter. It doesn't scare her anymore. The sound isn't menacing now. It's soft, rhythmic, almost comforting. Because the water kept her, yes, but it also carried her home. And maybe in its strange, silent way, it carried her truth too, just waiting for the right moment to rise to the surface. When a person disappears, time doesn't just move forward, it bends. Days stretch into months, and grief reshapes everything it touches. But after the noise fades, after the headlines quiet down, what's left is something quieter and deeper, memory. For Lori Jernigan, memory became her compass. Even after her daughter's remains were found, she kept doing what she'd always done, talking about Ebby, fighting for her, keeping her name alive. The day they found her wasn't the end, she said once. It was the beginning of something else, the fight to make sure no one forgets who she was. And that's what this story really is. It's not about the mystery of a disappearance, though that mystery still lingers. It's about the love that refused to die with her. After 2018, Lori began channeling her grief into purpose. She worked with advocacy groups focused on missing persons cases, giving interviews to raise awareness about how easily young adults, especially girls, can slip through procedural cracks. She shared what she had learned, the mistakes, the delays, the heartbreak, hoping other families would never have to live what she had lived. She spoke about the first 48 hours, how vital they are. She urged people to trust her instincts, to push back when told maybe she ran away. She taught others that persistence isn't pestering, it's protection. And people listened. Across Arkansas, families with missing loved ones began reaching out to her. Some for advice, some just because they knew she would understand the kind of silence that follows when the world moves on, but you can't. Her voice became one of quiet strength, a mother who had looked into every possible dark corner and still managed to speak with compassion. She didn't just want justice. She wanted change. The Little Rock Police Department, to their credit, acknowledged the early missteps in Ebby's case. Internal reviews were conducted. New training in missing persons procedures were reportedly implemented. And while that didn't bring closure, it meant that her story was making a difference, protecting others in ways she never got to be protected. That's what legacy really is. There's a park bench now at Chalamon Park, a small, simple thing, engraved with her name, in loving memory of Ebby Jane Steppach. It sits a few yards from where her car was found, surrounded by trees that have grown thicker since 2015. Birds nest in their branches. Children play nearby. Life continues, as it always does, oblivious of the ghosts that linger beneath its surface. But sometimes in the late evening, when the wind rustles through the leaves, people say it feels different there. Not heavy, not haunted, just sacred, like the ground itself remembers. Lori visits that bench often. Sometimes she sits quietly. Sometimes she talks out loud, just as she used to. She'll tell Ebby about the people she's met, the families she's helped, the lives she's touched. She'll talk about the little signs she sees, a butterfly that lands near her hand, a song that plays unexpectedly, a sudden feeling of warmth in an empty room. She's still here, Lori said in one interview, just not the way I wanted her to be. It's easy to reduce cases like this to tragedy, but to do that is to miss who Ebby was. She wasn't just a missing person or a headline. She was a daughter who made everyone laugh when she walked into a room. A sister who called just to say, "I love you," for no reason. A friend who stayed up late giving advice she probably needed herself. In life, she gave light. In death, she became it. There's a certain irony in that a girl lost in darkness would one day be remembered for the way she illuminated others. Her story has reached millions now. True crime podcasts, documentaries, and online tributes have carried her name far beyond Little Rock. But for those who loved her, she never belonged to the noise. She belonged to the quiet moments, to laughter around the dinner table, to road trips with music blasting, to hugs that lingered just a little too long. That's what the world should remember. Not the drain, not the mystery, the light, because that's what stayed. And maybe that's the real truth hidden in all of this, that love outlasts everything. It outlasts loss and time, and even unanswered questions. It's the one thing that can't be buried or washed away. There are still open questions in Ebby's case. The alleged assault she told friends about remains unproven, with no charges filed. The manner of her death remains officially undetermined. And though police have not ruled out foul play, no one has been held accountable. The investigation, as of today, is still considered active, but Lori doesn't measure justice in court dates anymore. For her, justice means keeping Ebby's story alive, making sure her daughter's name continues to mean something. Every October, friends and family gather in Little Rock to release lanterns into the night sky. They watch as tiny flames rise above the city, glowing softly until they disappear into the darkness. Each light represents a prayer, a promise, a memory. When the last one fades, Lori always whispers the same words that have become a kind of vow between mother and daughter. You are found, but you are never gone. And in that moment, the park feels still again. The air softens. The wind quiets. Somewhere in the distance, you can almost imagine the echo of a young woman's laughter carried on the breeze. Because even when the world forgets, light remembers the way home. Ebby Jane Steppach, daughter, sister, friend, fighter, left behind more than mystery. She left behind proof that love doesn't end where life does. It lingers. It teaches. It changes things. And in the heart of a mother who refused to stop knocking, it burns on, steady, defiant, eternal, the light that stayed.